Everyone. I'm John Polini, Professor of Classical Art, Archaeology, and History in the Department of Art History at USC, and I'm Director of the Visual Culture of the Ancient World Initiative, otherwise known as VCAW. And before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Aaron Burke, President of the LA Society of the Archaeological Institute of America, for co-sponsoring our talk this evening. And secondly, I'd also like to thank Professor Ken Sellingson, the LA Society's membership coordinator, for all his help in setting up this Zoom lecture. It's now my great pleasure to present our speaker, Owen Doonan, Professor of Art History at Cal State University, Northridge, and Director of the Sinope Regional Archaeological Project since 1996. Professor Owen received his PhD in Old World Archaeology from Brown University in 1993 after obtaining his BA and MA degrees in Classics and Classical Archaeology at Tufts University. And from 1992 to 1995, he taught in the archaeology department of Bilkent University in Ankara, Turkey, after which he joined the Department of Art History at Cal State Northridge, where he has been teaching ancient art history and archaeology since 2003. Well, as many of you know who belong to the AIA Society, Professor Doonan has served in the past as president and vice president of our LA Society of the AIA. In addition, he chairs the AIA's Eastern Europe and Eurasia Interest Group. He's also been the AIA's GMA Hanfmann Lecturer in the year 2016-17, and he serves on AIA's Fellowship Committee. As an active field archaeologist, Professor Doonan has excavated in Italy, Greece, Spain, and Israel, and since 1996, he has directed the Sinope Regional Archaeological Project, as I mentioned, in Turkey. In addition to authoring some 50 articles and book chapters, he has published several books, and among his numerous honors and grants are fellowships from the NEH, the National Geographic Society, the Getty Foundation, and the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung. And I also should mention that he has been very proactive in the public outreach program of the Turkish American community in North America and its host community in Sinope. So I now welcome Professor Doonan to start his PowerPoint talk titled Expedition to Ancient Cinepay, News from Sinope and Beyond. And before we start the lecture, I just want to mention that at the end of the Q&A, if you have a question, you can put it in chat. Be sure to include your name, and or you can just put a question mark and then your name, and then you can unmute. And if you also want to turn your video on, you can. That's up to you. Okay, so Owen, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much, John, for kindly inviting me to participate in this conference and to speak at this wonderful collaborative event sponsored by USC and the Los Angeles County Society of the AIA. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to share our results and also some of our ideas and our new thinking with our community here in Los Angeles. I'd also like to thank you for that kind introduction, and it really is such a pleasure and an honor to be able to be with all of you during these strange days. The topic that I'd like to address tonight is our expedition to ancient Cinepay, and I'd like to share with all of you some news of our especially recent synthetic kind of thinking and work that's been done, in particular made possible by the by some of the restrictions of the coronavirus. And so today's theme is basically going to be focused on collaboration, on how people come together and create together. And so that'll be the theme that weaves through several different sub-themes. Ancient Cinepay was the crossroads of the ancient Black Sea, which was called the turntable of Eurasia by the distinguished historian George Bratianu back in the late 60s. Our excavations at Sinope are now being synthesized into a multi-author volume. And I want to present what I'm talking about tonight in that spirit. I am frontman here for a wonderful and very dynamic team. And so I hope I represent our team ideas well. So there are four basic ideas that all do connect with this concept of collaboration and coming together that I'd like to emphasize in tonight's talk. The first one is the perspectives that our excavations from 2015 to 2017 at Sinope have given us on the emergence of mobile maritime, colonial, and indigenous communities around the Black Sea and their cultural and economic and entanglements. The second sub-theme has to do with the evolution of the city plan in Cinepay and the very interesting ways in which the city plan co-evolved together with the city wall, which is the monument that we're particularly focused on in these past 3 seasons of excavation. And the wall in particular served as an interface between urban and peri-urban and rural landscapes, but it also in many ways served as the face of the city during certain phases of the city's development. And then I'd like to move to sort of pivot a bit for my last point. And I'd like to brainstorm with you, and I would in fact welcome vigorous discussion on this last topic, thinking about how we might establish an effective framework for collaboration between archaeological projects and the many local, national, and international stakeholders with which we are connected. And I'm going to use the metaphor archaeological ecosystem, and let's see how you think about those ideas. All right, now much of what I'll be talking about tonight really emerges out of our 2015 to 2017 excavations and a recent AIA colloquium that we held in Boston on the Synop Citadel excavations. And there were 7 papers given on various aspects of our 2015 to 2017 digs at that conference, covering many different periods and phases of Synop evolution and different kinds of evidence that we've been finding in the excavations, and also we've supplemented these with several other chapters to produce a volume. The English manuscript is nearly complete at this point, and we're going to be, or we're engaged in translating the entire text into Turkish as well. So the volume will come out as an English-Turkish parallel translation. And we feel that's very important because it's necessary for our results to be fully accessible to not only the academic community in the U.S. and Europe, but also we want to be very accessible to our Turkish colleagues, their students in particular, and the community of Turkish interested lay people, both in Sinop and beyond, because again, this is one of the main themes of our project, really, not just of this talk. So I start out with this metaphor, the turntable of Eurasia, that was introduced by Bratianu. The Black Sea here. I like to share this map when we begin, because it really it's disorienting in many ways. Many colleagues spend their entire careers focused completely on, say, the Mediterranean or Mesopotamia or Anatolia, and also the Eurasian steppe. But it's really a map like this that makes it clear, first of all, the immense potential of the Eurasian steppe to impact the historical developments in these sometimes more familiar civilizations of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, but also it's I think it also helps us to understand how centered the Black Sea truly is. And it is the arena where these three great Eurasian culture zones interacted, not just in any particular period, but habitually over at least a period of 4,000 years or so. Now to zoom in a little bit on the Black Sea itself, and Sinope, you can see, is at the midpoint of the south coast of the Black Sea, the Anatolian coast of the Black Sea. It is the best deep harbor port anywhere on the south coast, and one of the best in the entirety of the Black Sea. It is located not only at the midpoint of the south coast, but also it's located at the point which is most propitious for especially north to south travel in across the middle of the Black Sea. And that has to do with the circulation of surface currents and also the reduced distance that you see between North Anatolia and Crimea. So, Cinepay is really ideally situated to control many aspects of Black Sea trade, Black Sea politics, the sort of military affairs and projection of power, and so forth. So it's a very key point in the Black Sea mariscape. Then as we zoom in on our site itself, Sinope, you can see that is in this detail here. Our excavation is at the furthest little point in the entire ancient city, a tiny slip of land that we were granted by the mayor of Sinope as an initial area for excavation. We can say a sort of proof of concept, and we were able, despite the marginal location and the small size of our initial excavation space, we were able to achieve some pretty remarkable discoveries about the history of the city. The city wall that I'll be talking about so much runs from this large tower at the top of your image down across the main street and runs down to about here. You see a corner in the in this run of wall. That's the end of the ancient wall. The rest of this is all, for the most part, Middle Byzantine and Ottoman, Seljuk and Ottoman. So we'll be focusing on the ancient, the Hellenistic wall for the most part. Now, the excavations that we're carrying out at Sinope are actually part of a regional research structure. So we don't think of the excavations as the only subject of our work. In fact, the excavations are embedded in a research design, which is a regional one. Over numerous seasons, we conducted systematic surveys in the highlighted parts of the Sinope promontory, and we recorded some 400 sites of varying dates, for the most part ranging from Chalcolithic, say the 5th millennium BC, to Byzantine. Now, one of the things that really struck us as remarkable in our surveys was that we were finding materials, even in the Bronze Age, 2300 BC, and even in some cases in the Chalcolithic, that were connecting to faraway cultures on different shores of the Black Sea, and even down in Mesopotamia and the Caucasus and northwestern Anatolia. And this was a very remarkable result, because it seemed like many of these sites were quite small and had very little potential for anything like what we would call trade. And so what was going on here? Well, we thought that perhaps I'll get to the explanation in just a moment. Okay, so here's an example, the site of Kojagos, which is a modest little mound, a huyuk, which is about 60 meters across, about 15, 20 meters high, and is for the most part showing early Bronze Age materials. But those materials we found and recorded at Kojagos came from a range of different areas, including the eastern Black Sea of Anatolia near Samsun, but also all the way into the Kura-Araxes region in the eastern Black Sea. An even more stunning array of finds popped up at our site Guluavlu, again right in the middle of the promontory, quite far from the sea. And at Guluavlu, we found these tripods like this one here, which connect with the Yamnaya cultures of Ukraine and the steppe. We found these burnished teapot spouts, which are typical of central Anatolia. This sort of nice, we term these eyebrows that are typical of the Karanova culture in Bulgaria, and incised wares we might expect from northwestern Anatolia. So very, very diverse range of finds, yet at the same time, no evidence of any kind of economy beyond a very sort of simple subsistence level village settlement. Okay, so again, I just pop back to this map to remind you of some of these remarkable proveniences we recorded. Now, among the early sites that we recorded an eroding bits of architecture from a scarp right beneath Sinope all the way back in 1997. And we, in 2000, with the support of the National Geographic Society and permission from the Turkish Ministry of Culture, we were able to make a scarp cut, just basically clean back the face of this erosion scarp, and we recorded a number of prehistoric houses that were layered one on top of the other. And one of the remarkable things about this site was that we weren't seeing what we would consider any Greek or Roman pottery. What we were finding at this site was pottery with parallels in the Western Black Sea and the Northern Black Sea, in Ukraine, in Romania, in Bulgaria. The architecture itself is clearly the same as the pit houses, which are typical of the Ukrainian coast or or again, the Bulgarian or Romanian coastal sites from mostly the early first millennium BC. So before the time that would have been associated with colonization. So it was largely because of those early finds that we decided to focus on that location for the Sinope excavations. And we began in 2015. We've excavated two relatively large trenches, Operation 1 and Operation 4. These are both 6 meters by 10 meters in extent. And then a couple smaller operations, Operation 2, which was cut right against the Hellenistic wall, and Operation 5, which investigated the stratigraphy on the inner part of the large fortification wall. A small sliver of Operations 1 and 4, you see this little triangle here, yielded very clean finds that tended to be not including a lot of historical things, not including the classical and Hellenistic pottery that we were finding in other parts of the site, but these were all sort of fills, and they included, so they weren't undisturbed, but they included a high proportion of really early looking material, and some of which, even in our first season, we started to think may well date all the way back to the 3rd millennium BC. Here we see some of the finds. These incised spindle whorls, for example, are very typical of the early Bronze Age in our region. Fish hooks and blades were intriguing finds, and numerous fish bones and some terrestrial animal bones as well. And so this particular mixture is quite intriguing. Now, I want to underscore that that to date, our research that connects with the very early periods in Sinope is limited to mixed fills, but on the other hand, the finds, especially this group of terracotta idols, which have very close parallels to similar early Bronze Age from central Anatolia. These finds clearly secure the idea that there was some activity here as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. Unfortunately, at this time, it's pretty hard to characterize that activity very clearly. But it was also notable that fish hooks, especially the one that I just showed you, were found, and also numerous fish bones. Now, in addition to the to the material finds, there was one structure which was very fragmentary. We're not exactly sure. The phasing will go more towards the Iron Age or towards the colonial or early colonial phase. But one small structure here overlay a deposit of Iron Age vessels. Here we can see some of our students and our colleague Paulo Maranzana excavating in Operation 1, where these Iron Age deposits were found on some kind of a surface. It's a destroyed context. And one vessel that was relatively intact was actually found with vertebrae of anchovies, hamsi as they're called in Turkey. Now hamsi are one of the most beloved components of Black Sea culture. Absolutely everybody in the region adores hamsi. They even have in the city of Trabzon down the coast, a dessert made out of hamsi. So the people of Sinop were literally celebratory over us finding evidence of hamsi being stored in these pots like this. It's quite reasonable to suppose that there may have been catching of fish and either salting or otherwise processed on the site. Interestingly enough, the ceramics that were found in this deposit, they aren't local in form, but the clays used to make them are quite local. And so it seems that whoever was coming to this site, and you remember we were finding pottery from with styles similar to the west coast of the Black Sea, the north coast of the Black Sea. These finds, these people were coming and spending a certain amount of time, probably during the seasons when the fish migrate by Sinope. In fact, the seasonality of the important species of fish, including palamut, ancient Pelamides, hamsi, or anchovies. These fish are very, very regular in their circumpontic circulation, and all of the local populations know very well the timing of these migrations. Now, one of the things that I am always astonished at is the skill of our main fish hunter among our graduate students, Antonia Santangelo, who was able to pick out these hamsi vertebrae. This is a centimeter scale, just to give you an idea of how much better Antonia's eyes are than, well, certainly better than mine. And so through these investigations, one of the major early discoveries we made was that we made the invisible Sinope Iron Age visible. And so one of the things that had been almost a cliche about Sinope was that the region was that the Iron Age hinterland was empty. There was nobody living out there. And somehow there were lots of early Bronze Age sites, but then mysteriously everybody disappeared until people started getting Hellenistic imported pottery, and suddenly the hills were alive once again. We, in the survey, years of the survey, never believed that, but we never had access to a stratified excavation to really nail down the wares and techniques that were used in the region during the Iron Age. So through our excavations at Sinope, one of the first and most, I think, powerful results has been to make the invisible Iron Age visible. And this is a sort of mapping of many of the sites from our survey and some of them from museum surveys over the years that display what we would consider Iron Age characteristics. And one of the interesting other results was that during the Bronze Age and Iron Age, these many coastal sites seem to have had a component of settlement. Now, settlements like these by the sea, here's Sinope. This is that scarp you saw a few minutes ago. This is the Gerze Kirchhuyuk. And here is, actually my arrow has gotten misplaced. This little nub over here is also an Iron Age site. And so, so sites like this are obviously not terribly appropriate for people to spend time farming and so forth. So that these are perfect candidates for seasonal activity, seasonal use, and then over perhaps in a settlement pattern that was either populated by local terrestrial people who might come out seasonally to use these sites, or a kind of maritime culture. And so it's our working hypothesis at this point that we're really looking at the evolution of, let me see if I can go back to a big picture here, go back to a model of a kind of mariculture in which the peoples of the Black Sea coast functioned more as an integrated maritime community, and perhaps in a kind of symbiotic relationship with the more terrestrial oriented civilizations or cultures, communities in the plains and the mountains and the hills around the sea. And so this is the sort of working hypothesis for our model for how Black Sea trade and interaction was born, perhaps as early as 2300 BC. Now, moving on to another major point, another wonderful result of our work has been that investigating Sinope, and remember, we're way over here at the edge of the city. Our excavations here have given us insights into the evolution of the urban setting. And this is quite important. And this is the point where I'd like to start thinking about collaboration with the local community, collaboration with the Sinope Museum in particular, in this case, which has conducted dozens of excavations over the years around the city and in the countryside. And so what I've done here is taken this Google Earth image and darkened to the best of my estimation where the ancient coastline might have been, as opposed to the modern fills on the north and the south shores. And one of the things that we've started to observe is the likelihood that the southern harbor included two components, a sort of a military harbor and a commercial harbor that was more open. There was also a northern harbor as well and all of these have been filled in. The fills on the south go all the way back to the Byzantine, many of them. The fills in the North Harbor are actually quite recent. So we'll talk about these. So the evolution of the city plan over time, and when we're talking about the Bronze and Iron Ages, we're still pretty much limited to the area where we have excavated the evidence that I've just shared with you. Now, as we move into the colonial phase, the 7th and 6th centuries BC, there seem to be two areas of where the museum work and our work have shown activity. Obviously, these are very non-systematic results because the city is covered with modern structures, but there are a number of finds that the museum has made of early pottery, both Ionian pottery, and which would have been probably associated with the early foundation of the colony, and other Athenian and Corinthian pottery, which is better known and already published. I might mention that the things that I'm talking about here right now regarding the city plan are the subject of an article that I'm co-authoring with Hussein Vural, who is the director of the Sinope Museum. And he is generously and enthusiastically supporting a project, our project, which aims to reconstruct the ancient city plan through the opportunities afforded by largely by rescue excavations conducted by the museum. So there's a sort of cluster of Ionian pottery finds from 7th and early 6th centuries in this area. And notice that it's immediately overlooking this inner harbor, this more narrow harbor here. And then over where our excavations are, we've been finding early material, although none of it has been Ionian. We do have some archaic finds for Greek material, and also some, of course, the Iron Age material as well, which may well coincide with the 7th and 6th centuries. And then we also know of a series of cemeteries on the slopes on the south side of the main street that have been excavated decades ago, mostly in the context of buildings that are on the site. So this was a large cemetery, particularly in the Archaic period. Now, in our excavations, this little wall here, you may have noted it. This wall is made of very smoothed, water-smoothed cobbles, and fairly regular in size and form. It it was initially believed to be one of those pit houses. When in 2015, we only found this little area here, but as we extended our investigations, it was clear that this was a long and straight wall, not a pit house wall, and also we had the enormous luck of having just the tiniest sliver of mud brick surviving over the top of this between the asphalt surface of the paved parking lot, which this was repurposed as a parking lot in the 1960s. And you can see we literally had about 20 centimeters of degraded mud brick, but our interpretation of this feature is that this is a footing for a mud brick wall, given that its orientation is parallel to the fortification wall. It appears that this would have been the archaic phase of the city wall of Cinepay. And this was an important find because there are references, the most colorful of which I've attached here. There are references to a city wall that was clearly built before the monumental wall that's more obvious and that was constructed in the Hellenistic period. So this comes from Aeneas Tacticus, who collected a range of stories about how to survive under siege. And one of his stories was about the people of Sinope when they found themselves dangerously short of men during their war against Datames. That was in 382 BCE. They disguised and equipped the most physically suitable of their women to make them look as much as possible like men, giving them jugs and similar bronze utensils in place of shields and helmets, and promenading them on the side of the wall where they were in fullest view of the enemy. So this very colorful anecdote, by the way, is of enormous interest to the people of Synop, particularly because they associate their region with women warriors and Amazons. That's a story for another day, however. So we have this early wall that is just parallel to the main wall, the Hellenistic wall. And then in the late classical and Hellenistic period, our recent finds have given us reason to believe there was a fundamental expansion and monumentalizing of the city. And so we have an urban core with a kind of grid plan emerging here to the east of the Sinope, and the street plan is largely based on this main east-west street here. The main north-south street in the early part of the early core of the city intersects here, and there has been speculation for some time that the large space that's now occupied by a Seljuk complex, including a large mosque garden, medrese, and associated buildings, that this is very likely to have been built over some kind of an agora or forum because of, in particular, the religious nature of the buildings on the site. It is quite challenging to pursue investigations in that area at this point. But we can see in this main urban area a very interesting sort of organization of the streets, and which does suggest a loose grid plan, not terribly sort of strict as we might see in many other sites. Then the other feature that's quite interesting here is we have this north harbor and then a south harbor that we've talked about before, which have become more clear to us in part because of the discovery of a Hellenistic tower that was embedded into the later Byzantine wall. And so what it looks like is that some component of the wall was built, and I'll show you the evidence for this in a bit, was extended down as far as this spot here. The other interesting find was that the Sinope Museum excavated what appears to be boat slips, or a possible sort of landing for boats in, again, pretty far inland here. So this is why I'm theorizing that the coast actually comes pretty far in from the original, from the current filled in sort of city that we have today. Now, we have these straight streets running between the two harbors, and there is a temple precinct here, which would make sense at a major intersection or along a major thoroughfare. So that we're hoping to work with the Sinope Museum and the Sinope Mayor's Office as a major building project in this area is going to demolish a number of civic buildings here, and an open square, and also remove a number of shops and other buildings along what may have been a major road running between the two harbors. So this is an opportunity we're hoping we can contribute to going forward. So another very interesting development in the late classical and Hellenistic phase is the development of a series of suburban villas with quite fine mosaics of a very distinctive type. A series of pebble mosaics have been found in this area, and I'll show you one or two examples that I can, but it's really a very remarkable series. There's about half a dozen of these villas that can be identified at this point. And so what we're thinking is these suburban villas sort of dotted the hill slopes to the east of the city, and the quality is quite high, and suggests quite a distinguished local workshop. Okay. Now, in thinking about the development of the city, one of our important results at Sinope has been that we've been able to redate the construction of the Hellenistic fortification wall, which had been traditionally associated either with the conquest of Cinepay by Pharnaces I in 183, 182, or perhaps associated in the beautification of the city under Mithridates VI, who was born here and identified very much with the city. And so the monumental wall had always traditionally been associated with one of those two of the Pontic kings. Our excavations have moved that back substantially into, I would say, the first quarter or the transition between the first and second quarters of the 3rd century BCE. So this is a phase prior to the conquest by Pharnaces, and it also corresponds to the period when Sinope is really undergoing a major flowering. The late 4th and early 3rd centuries was really in many ways a heyday for Sinope. So the excavations adjacent to the city wall, carried out by, led by Jane Rempel of Sheffield University, were successful in identifying the fills associated with the building of the wall. The fills that are the construction fills, for the most part, are dominated by ceramics datable to the last quarter of the 4th century and the first quarter of the 3rd century. And Jane and I will be publishing the redating of these materials in our collaborative volume that I mentioned at the outset of the talk. Now, this Hellenistic period wall was really beautiful, state-of-the-art, quite unusual in many ways, but typical, I suppose, of the spirit of the age. This was a time of grand royal ambitions for many local kings and dynasts, and so the beauty and the technical sophistication of the wall fit in with the time. One of the most remarkable features are these wonderful hinges. For some of them are covering catapult windows, and some of them are these are the broader ones, like we see here. The narrower ones are for either bowmen or perhaps crossbows. The lower story, close to the ground level, was typically populated with these narrow arrow slits, and then a second level of the wall was then armed with these catapult portals. And so they seem to occur in a sort of pattern, with 2 arrow slits at ground level, and then at the second level, 3 catapult portals that angle in different directions. So about 30 degrees to the north, straight out to the west, and 30 degrees to the south. This set of catapult windows is rather typical. And now there are references, of course, to these kinds of shutters over arrow and ballistic ports. And for example, the Heliopolis of Demetrius Poliorcetes in the siege of Rhodes is said to have had these grand, this very impressive shutters over the ballista and arrow ports, and so that would be a feature that would be literally state of the art for the early decades of the 3rd century BCE. My animation students, and who are led by Professor Mark Farquhar at Cal State Northridge, have been working on a series of animated short films that illustrate various stories about the Sinope and one of the preparatory animations here gives you a sense of the reconstruction of the wall and how it functions. So I'll share that with you very briefly. So you see the doors and opening and closing there. And then we have surmised that there may also have been catapults, not these scorpions, but the torsion catapults mounted up on top of one or more of the towers as well. So this was a pretty impressive city wall, and it was made to be an impressive and intimidating sort of active participant in wars and in negotiating the interface between the local community in the city and the near peri-urban and rural communities on the mainland. Now, discovery last February, in fact, has also led us to understand that there was a wall and probably also certainly at least one tower of the same kind of Hellenistic masonry on the east side of the city, and it's located here on our map. And so this has transformed our understanding of the nature of the city wall. It certainly was never at this time a wall that would have surrounded the entire city, but it appears that there may have also been some kind of a city fortification on the east side that at the very least gave a kind of formal definition to the military harbor here. And I just also, while we're at it, wanted to share with you the evidence, some of the evidence for the northern harbor. So if we've been looking at this northern harbor in my reconstruction here. Here is an aerial photograph from the 1950s where you can see very clearly the outlines of the North Harbor that's now filled in and covered by the city marketplace. Now, Cinepay in the 4th century BCE was the city of Diogenes with all of his fascinating implications. It was a city with these fascinating pebble mosaic workshop. This was actually excavated by Akragal and Buddha back in the 1950s. And you can see an interesting technique here with the pebbles actually set some vertically and some horizontally to create a variegated pattern, which is quite distinctive. The style fits in well with the pebble mosaics of the 5th and 4th century. And it is, this mosaic was cut by the building of a small temple in the 2nd century BC. So this is all we have of this particular mosaic, which happens to be in the museum garden. Monumental tombs, and particularly this quite beautiful sculpture of a pair of lions attacking a deer that was actually located well out into the countryside. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. So that mosaic that I just shared with you has now been joined by a number of others scattered about the slopes of Boztepe to the east of the city. And you can see that they are quite early in style. Some of them actually compare quite successfully with themes in the Olynthus pebble mosaics, late 5th century, early 4th century, and so this distinctive approach of having some of the pebbles on edge and some more flattened is evident in pretty much all the early mosaics in the area. So again, we're basically thinking that we have a local workshop that is actually serving a very well-to-do clientele. We can also see interesting parallels, for example, up in Ponticapayum in the northern Black Sea, and so this is the evidence, I believe, of the emergence of a quite well-to-do elite sector of the Sinope community. And then switching to this evidence of the monumental tomb, this was a most likely a pedimental sculpture from a monumental tomb. The tomb itself was actually found far out of the city. This has been published by Ludwig Bude back in 1963. But the lion and stag group was actually found far outside of the town, and recent excavations and accidental finds of classical period tombs suggest that the road leading outside of Sinope was worthy of prestigious and high quality monuments at this time. Could we be looking at some kind of a processional road? We don't have an ex-urban temple to show you as the destination just yet. So let's see. Okay, the city, beautiful. Site. We have this series of tumuli overlooking the city from the east on the slopes, and also overlooking the harbor to the south. So we have these tumuli that are positioned in high visibility locations that are again expressing the position of the wealthy and powerful emergent wealthy class here. Our surveys and the museum excavations and other finds on Boztepe suggest that there's a whole series of villas that are rural villas that are dedicated to production of most likely wine on Boztepe around this time. I know the time is tight here. And I'd like to also then call attention to the spike in the predominance of Sinope amphoras in sites like Histros on the west coast of the Black Sea, right around the same time frame. So the early 3rd century down to the first 3 quarters, basically, of the 3rd century, quite predominant in the assemblage of amphora handles at Histros. So it looks like Sinope became engaged in a wine export industry around this time. Not only import abroad, but also locally. And so we also start to see amphoras and imported black slip cups that that all are popping up in association with Iron Age sites over into the hinterland. And so there seems to be a strong engagement with the hinterland during this time as well. I just wanted to go back to the emerging city plan and to think about how with the grid plan and the north and south harbors, the multiple precincts of public activity, the way that the overall Hellenistic plan of Sinope is coming together is becoming closer and closer to what we might see as a Milesian model, the mother city of Sinope as a colony, of course. I think because of time concerns, I'm going to not go into our Roman phase. I feel terrible about it. If you want to ask me questions at the afterwards, I'll be happy to jump into the Roman discussion. So I hope that I'd like to just take a minute or two or a few minutes to brainstorm with you. And this is how I'll pull the talk to a close. And I'd like to be brainstorming about this idea of an archaeological ecosystem. You can see how important it's been for us to engage with multiple stakeholders in our archaeological project, and including members of the public, both the local public and international and private institutions, governmental institutions, institutions dedicated to economic development, cultural heritage, and environmental heritage management, educational institutions, and our academic institutions as well. So an archaeological project doesn't function in a vacuum. An archaeological project is the hub of an intersecting network of institutions and communities. And in a sense, I think it's necessary to be always keeping in mind our stakeholders and many different kinds of stakeholders as we design our not only our field activities and our outreach efforts, but also the outputs, the costs that we are bringing to the communities who support and host us, and the very different sets of outputs that are of interest to those different stakeholders. So I think this is a, for an archaeology project today, we can't think of ourselves as existing in a purely academic universe. That's a luxury that I believe is no longer available to us. And so different stakeholders are contributing their lands and environmental costs, offering financial support, labor, infrastructure, skills, and so on and so forth. And the stakeholders have different kinds of leverage over whether we can work or not. And these these things are truly impactful on our project. And so I guess the question is, and the question I'd like to put out to you, the audience, and colleagues, and is, how is it that we develop an optimal playing field, an optimal arena for such a diverse array of interests and decision makers? Now, we have taken the step of collaborating quite enthusiastically with the local community. We have made a number of close collaborative agreements with the mayor of Sinope, Barış Aydın, and Milletvekili Parliamentar Barış Karadeniz. We've engaged in numerous kinds of events that bring in the public and bring in other members of the community, members of local cultural organizations and business organizations as full-on partners in our efforts. So that I think the question I would really put to the audience is to what extent can we create a more optimized archaeological ecosystem in which it's not just basically raising money and going off into the field, but there's a greater level of sort of multilateral engagement. And so in that spirit, I'd like to bring the talk to a close and ask if you have questions. I would like to, of course, thank our field team, wonderful team. I couldn't ask for a better and significantly more patient group of colleagues and students and friends. Thanking the Sinope community for their efforts and their generosity, their support, and of course the many institutional stakeholders that have made our work possible. And I thank you for your patience in keeping with this lecture. Thanks.
Teşekkür ederim. That was wonderful lecture. It was a wonderful presentation, and the many wonderful things that you found there, and also for that very informative survey of the history of Sinope based on the material evidence, as well as your excavations and the finds that have come from the site, which I knew nothing really about. So that was quite interesting. So I'll repeat once again, if some came in late to the lecture, if you have a question, you can put your question in chat. Just put either a Q or a question mark with your name. That way I can call on you. And we have one already. Let's see. Private. Okay, from Ken.
Okay, I can see the one that Ken has asked.
Okay.
So I can take that one.
Okay.
So the question is knowledge of the type of aquatic transportation used during the Bronze and Iron Age periods. Was the climate like? What was it like compared to Greece? So what we're anticipating is that these are small boats that are, for the most part, designed for near coastal navigation. There are, in some of my research, and actually, if you look into, for example, Xenophon's description of the Eastern Black Sea, it looks like they're using something like dugout canoes, basically. So I think we're talking about boats on that scale. I'm not sure whether anyone has any perspective about whether sails were in use in the Bronze and Iron Age in the Black Sea. Certainly in later periods, sailing was important. And the climate of Synop is, sometimes I go much more ecological in my discussion here. The climate of Synop is much like the situation in the Pacific Northwest. So the prevailing winds come over the Black Sea, and they dump a lot of moisture in the northern mountains in Anatolia. So this is so the climate is cooler, much cooler than most places in the Mediterranean. Our experience of the climate, basically mid 80s to high 80s for summertime, high temperatures. There's precipitation pretty much year round, although less precipitation in summer. And annually, we're talking about 35 to 40 inches of precipitation at this site. So I guess, does that answer Charlie's question and Bruce's question together?
Okay, good. I have a question. Well,
Okay.
given the heavy trade in the Black Sea, as we know, and the fact that ships generally, hug the coast all around as well as go across it,
Mhm,
and warfare as well, as you showed in some of the images.
mhm.
Uh, what about, has anybody undertaken any underwater surveys of this area? Or even recreational scuba divers, have they brought up any evidence? Since the Black Sea is one of those places where there's a lot of oxygen on the bottom, and as a result, wood and other things preserve much better than other parts of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, well, interesting. That it's an interesting question because, in fact, our project way back in the mid 1990s originated as the counterpart to the terrestrial counterpart to the survey that was led by Robert Ballard and Fred Hebert um, uh, of underwater, doing a kind of systematic underwater survey
Mhm.
using side scanning sonar. And that project continued up until about 2003. Most of the finds they made were actually Byzantine ships, which is hardly surprising. In fact, there was a huge expansion in the Byzantine, early Byzantine or late Roman, depending on how you prefer to characterize it, in both Sinope in the city and in the countryside, as this area became part of the fundamental supportive hinterland for Constantinople, the new, of course, the new metropolis. And so and so the so as so so those finds are I mean, I wouldn't say that the survey had enough time and support to fully come to an understanding of the uh, material record underwater. It's a pity that it was never really able to fulfill that, but it has certainly been done, and in many ways, much of the systematic survey going on under a similar research design in many parts of the world. It was one of the first examples of that kind of work. Um, but the small ships of the early period, in particular, that we're talking about, have not shown, um, uh, have not been in evidence, at least not in the surveys that have been
Yeah.
carried out thus far.
Yeah, that's too bad because I mean it was such an important area for trade, especially during the time of the Athenian Empire in the Black Sea and all these other civilizations. Okay, I think there's
Well, I'm
one other.
always on the hunt for collaborators.
Right.
So if anybody here
I I haven't done
Anybody
underwater
here is
excavation
interested?
in a while.
Any of the people from the Ocean Institute or board, and they want to bring out their sonar, we'd be happy to.
There's a university it was an AIA lecture 3 years ago at the board meeting. That was all in the Black Sea survey, and I believe it was done by a Romanian or Bulgarian university.
Mhm.
Professor was on the East Coast of the United States, and I can do some more research to see who that was, but they found quite a few ships from all periods in the Black Sea.
In fact, there's been a very active program of surveys like that off the Bulgarian coast. Yeah, and Southampton as well is quite active in that area. Yeah, our particular area we started, and then you know, I'd rather not get into the nitty gritty.
I see there's a question also from Ergun on
Yes.
what are the next steps and goals in your Sinope excavations?
Okay, so the next goals and steps. I'm going to go to a kind of mappy thing for this talk, I guess. Let me. So so we have been negotiating with the mayor's office in Sinope, and actually received some important permissions to expand the area that we're working. Let me just find, if I can find an appropriate image that helps me talk about this, I'll do that. You know what? I guess what I'll do is, so if you can see this little aerial view up here, so our excavations have concentrated on this little slip of land at the far northwestern edge of the site, which is the edge of the ancient city. Again, the Hellenistic wall runs along here. In February, I went, last February, I went to Cinop. I can't believe it was only a year ago. And we negotiated with the town to have access to this parking area here, which is about 1.5 hectares, and a now decommissioned military base right here, which has, at the very least, remains of what seemed to be a Seljuk mosque and a Byzantine church. These two areas are under the control of the municipality, and they've approached us with the hope that we'll work together with the city to excavate in these areas. You can imagine we are rather eager to work in an area that has a mosque and a church, because where there's smoke, there's fire, as we say. It may well have been a sacred site going back earlier than the Byzantine. We certainly do have dismantled buildings that are used as spolia in the 5th century fortification wall, right on the outside of the main curtain wall. So there was a substantial building of some sort that was dismantled in this area. So it would be of great interest to work in that spot. We've also been negotiating with the Sinope Museum about excavating to the south of the main street here, because we've done ground penetrating radar work in these. This is a former prison complex, and it shows it's chock full of monumental rectilinear buildings made of big, impressive stone. I also do feel that this is an area on both sides of the street that has great potential to expand our investigation into the Iron Age village. So these are the areas, close to the core site that I'm particularly interested in, and that I've applied for permission to excavate as early as next summer. But, you know, when it comes to it, we also want to work with the city. And I mentioned before this very ambitious project to dismantle a whole, you see a whole bunch of public buildings here in the heart of the city. These are all slated for demolition. And there's a large plaza here as well. And this is an area that Ekrem Akergal and Ludwig Buddha had only the most cursory investigations of in the 1950s, but they were for more than a decade still hoping to go back, because they felt that this was such a rich and fascinating area. We know that the Sinope Museum has turned up a very lavish Roman house, a 4th century house here in this area. This is also the area where all of those Hellenistic villas with mosaics have been popping up, sort of scattered around this general area. So, so we would be very eager to work with the city to organize, for starters, probably ground penetrating radar studies in the plaza areas, to get some initial sense before the demolition starts of what we're up against. And then, you know, if that goes well, perhaps we can enter into some projects as they come along together with the city and or the museum, you know, as opportunities emerge. So that's part of what I'm talking about when we think about the ecosystem, right? The city, the general population, the national authorities, the academic community, the educational community, they all come to this project. They all surround this project with different possible fundamentally different interests, right? I'm of the belief that that this COVID business is going to fundamentally change the nature of tourism. How will tourism look in 20, 30, 50 years? A lot of archaeologists have justified the work we do by suggesting we're creating touristic assets for the host communities where we work. I think we need to rethink a lot of those kinds of ideas. You know, what is it? What do we bring to the table if we're not creating, you know, something for people to fly thousands of miles to gawk at? You know, what is it that we're bringing to the community? I think there are a lot of things that we bring to the community, but the truth of the matter is we're expensive. We consume community resources like land in the middle of cities, and we, you know, our projects demand a lot of support, and these are things that that more and more I feel we'll have to justify in new new ways of engagement, new ways of engaging multiple constituencies. So so part of our plan is focused on Sinope, but we also want to be able to work hand in hand with the community as some of these exciting new possibilities are emerging.
By the way,
Yeah,
Oh,
I would also mention that we are developing a proposal to conserve this set of really wonderful pebble mosaics. They're quite unusual in Turkey, and uh, and so we're trying to develop a program that will conserve and represent them in a way that's sustainable.
yeah. Owen, I was wondering, do you have any students there who would be interested in making a, film documentary of your site? That's what we did at Ostia when I was excavating there. One of our students did that, which was quite interesting. But that might be a thing to look into to see if any students would be interested in that sort of thing. And then that could be posted, of course, on the internet.
Yeah, well, we have made two films uh, over the years. We made one film, two films with the filmmaker Paul Goldsmith, a documentary filmmaker, and one of them focused on the field work in the in the survey, and one of them focused on the 2016 field season. Both of them can be linked to the site sinopexcavations.org.
Mhm.
I'll, let me see if I've spelled it right before I send it out to everybody in the chat box. So if you go to sinopexcavations.org, oh, I think it only went to one person. I always miss one of those things. Okay, let's see. Boom. Okay. So if you go to sinopexcavations.org, people can access the movies. One of the things when we talk about the multiple stakeholders, the university that I work at, Cal State Northridge, has a fundamentally different attitude than many Research One institutions towards what I do, right? And so I am always in a really trying to find ways to engage students in many different kinds of activities that connect with the site. So we're doing these animations, for example, with the senior animation internship students. We also did a sound exhibition with our students in the exhibition design class. And that was in collaboration with artists in Sinope and Europe. That was a pretty neat project. So yeah, it's actually interesting to being based in a university where I mean, I won't say research isn't. Let's say research isn't really foregrounded, and so. So I need to, in a way, function with a different currency, and thinking about the archaeological ecosystem again. The economy functions with money as its currency. The academic world functions with publications as their currency, and so how do we create a kind of sustainable balance between these different kinds of relationships and transactions that balance these many different stakeholders and their radically different needs and goals. I suppose I've had the opportunity to sort of think about that more than I might have if I had been in a different kind of a situation. So that's a rather interesting sort of sideline. So sinopexcavations.org, which is there's a lot of background. There's links to reports and articles. There's a donation button. There's a donation button. If anybody would like to donate, you can go to the website and make a contribution. So yeah, many possibilities.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? If not, I have one though. You didn't mention any Roman villas, and you didn't, as you said, couldn't get into the Roman situation. But after the defeat and the death of Mithridates VI,
Mhm.
was the site pretty much abandoned, or
Oh
was,
no, it
there was
was.
activity?
It's great. It just I started feeling guilty, and I figured I didn't want to make it a 4-hour talk.
Okay, but I mean, were there any Roman finds or Roman villas?
Yes. Well, the area where we're digging,
Yeah.
if you permit me, the area where we're digging is the Roman layers have been stripped off there when they turned it into a into a parking lot.
Okay.
But yeah, isn't that fun? But the city flourished in Roman times.
Oh, okay.
And let me just, I had a few slides that tie in with the Roman period. So
Did it
I'll
become a
indulge.
colony or not?
Well, it was a colony, so it was Colonia Julia Felix Sinope.
Oh, okay.
So it was, and founded, let's see, 47 BCE. And
So it's Caesar.
and then in Roman times, we see the expansion of the core urban area up into that space where the Hellenistic villas had been. And so we see a grid plan established out, extended out into that area, starting to go up the hill. And so the city was much larger. We also, I have a new article just out because we had some of the survey ceramics looked at again by some fresh eyes who were able to help us define a very robust community of farms in the countryside. We're supposing that this was the olive industry, which is mentioned by numerous historical sources. And it seems to be basically a kind of Roman freeholding villa rustica, rusticae out in the countryside, and also up a little bit, not that much, up on the Boztepe area that I showed you in that other slide. So actually, it was bustling and wealthy, and in terms of monumental evidence, most of the monumental evidence we see is really later. It's fifth to sixth, when there was a further expansion of the economy. I believe it's a basically emergence of a kind of moving from a kind of freeholder system agriculturally to large villa estates.
Yeah.
And at that point, we start to see really opulent villas out in the along the coast to the south, especially, and mosaics, beautiful, typical 6th century, 5th, 6th century mosaics, and a monastic complex and other, so there's a real kind of monumentality to the late antique. But it's pretty clear that the city flourished, just maybe in a kind of boring way in Roman times. the Romans did, one of the interesting things they did with the wall itself was they took the towers out of the Hellenistic wall and replaced them with a whole series of arches. So they basically, emasculated the bristling city wall. And interestingly, there's a single issue under Caracalla, dated 255 in the local calendar, or 208, that we see probably Severus, Juliana, and Caracalla on top of what seems to be a triple arch. And what I believe happened here is they pulled out the two towers on either side of the city gate and created out of that a triple arch entrance into the city. So there's it's a flourishing but rather dull place. Here's here's the 4th century mosaic that I mentioned, right adjacent to those government buildings that are going to be taken out. So this district, has real potential when they start removing the civic buildings, and it looks like a well-to-do extension of the main core urban zone.
Well, with their passion for hamsi, or the anchovies, was there any evidence found for garum? I mean, many of these villa economies did that sort of thing. Did you find any pots?
Well, Synop has a reputation for fish salting, and fish, pickled fish. Is it Dionysius of Halicarnassus? I forget the reference at the moment. It's not on the top of my head. Talks about Sinope fish, pickled fish, going for 100 silver pieces or something like that. So it was apparently rather prized. If you want, I can hunt down the.
That's really interesting. That probably
so Sinope is associated with pickling, and preserved fish as well. And one of the interesting effects of our excavation, which you might find interesting, is 3 years ago, a local business association instituted a competition for pickled fish in Sinope that became this sort of national phenomenon. I mean, it's an acquired taste. It's sort of like a pickled herring kind of thing, where you go, okay. Some people love it, and other people are just learning, I suppose. But they were having these national festivals called Lacerda is the name of the process. Lacerda festivals, hosted in Sinope, and showing our pot that had the little hamsi in it as the symbol, saying 3,000 years of fish pickling at Sinope. So in fact, it is it's also quite interesting when you can see that your project has potential to have those kinds of cultural impacts. That's also interesting, because the way the local community has picked up on our project and adopted it, and is interested in supporting and participating. This is I think this is the way forward for archaeology again.
Yeah, and this would be great also for experimental archaeology to produce some ancient garum type.
They'll do it. I'm sure there's an organic food industry, and they've got great fish, great fishing, always looking for ways to, diversify their profit structure. So I wouldn't be surprised. I didn't see any Sinope people at this talk, but maybe they're already working on it.
Okay, so anyway, anybody last minute questions or comments before we conclude?
Well, I'm astonished that we still have 13 people hanging on. This is This
Well,
is really
this is
wonderful.
great to have the discussion at the end.
Mhm.
So anybody else? Okay, well then, I thank you once again. That was a fantastic talk, and thank you for the addendum at the end on the Romans, which of course came to my
Yes.
heart. Oh, there is a little hand. Oh, that was a clap hand, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I thought
Yes.
that
Yeah.
was a question
Yeah, I
hand.
know
All
the
right.
little icons are hard to
Okay, yeah, all right,
hard
great.
to read sometimes.
So,
Okay, well, thank you so much, John, for hosting.
yes, and
Ken
thank
for
you.
organizing, Aaron for hosting, and yeah, it's been really really a great
Yeah, it was great.
a great evening for me too. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
all.
you. Ciao,
Ciao.
ciao.